Hello, welcome back to Bebop Review. My name's Andy Shaw. This is the second video in a series called How to Play Bebop. Before I start, I just want to tell you that because there's going to be quite a bit of work in this video, you need to get yourself a manuscript, some manuscript paper like this to work stuff out, which I'm going to give you. If I were you, I'd get one with staples in, like that, because you can keep them all together then, keep your book all together. If you buy some manuscript like this, which has got holes in, this type is so you can rip it out. You know, you can write arrangements or whatever and rip it out. If you're going to do it on these, get a little folder so you can keep and clip it in so you can keep these together, because they do come loose. This, you know, so it's not very good to keep it in pad. Also, get yourself a nice pen, right? Because doing lots and lots of writing is really painful on your hands. And also, a lot of you think, what about playing? Well, I'm not going to give you exercise. I'm going to tell you what Charlie Parker does and the other musicians, and I'm going to say this is what you should be practicing, you know. So you'll get lots of work like that. So, but before we do that, I really want to talk a bit more about jazz. So this video is entitled Myths, and I want to just try to get you to think about things differently to how you've been taught or you might be hearing from people. So first myth is that black people are better at jazz than white people. And you hear this all the time, because I do. It's basically a racist thing. What it is it started, the actual term, this term seems to have started actually from black people in the 1950s. They were going around, and it was all to do with this black power movement, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And they were the people who were kind of wanted to go back to Africa and that. And what it is there were lots of Muslims, these, you know, what's his name? That Elijah Muhammad, whatever they call him. His group, his group was in music as well. He got quite a few Muslims going into jazz, because a lot of jazz musicians at that time were changing the names. You got these Arabic names, you know, all coming along. Anyway, they were saying that they were all coming out with black players can play better than white players. They were, but not the top black people. The top black people were not saying that. Charlie Parker didn't say that, and Sonny Stitt didn't say that, and Cannonball Adderley didn't say that, and, you know, Coltrane didn't say that. None of these people actually said that. In fact, John Coltrane, sorry, not John Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley thought that was so silly that he actually came out with a statement that says he called that attitude of people saying that black people are better than white, he called it Crow Jim. It was an attitude that was directed from blacks onto whites. And Crow Jim comes from a term called Jim Crow. And Jim Crow was a series of laws that was brought out in the 1890s in America that really brought about segregation, which I just briefly want to talk about. Because American racism is one of the reasons why jazz actually developed, believe it or not. I know it sounds strange, but it is. When you look into the history. Now, the thing about America is, when the United States came into existence in 1776, right, when the War of Independence was over and America became a separate state, the United States, which would be very few states at that time. But it was basically the United States of America was the right-hand side of the United States today. It was basically that New York side coming down. And the central part of America was controlled by the French, right? And the West Coast, sorry, was controlled by the California side, was controlled by the Spanish. So you got three nations basically. You got the Americans, the French, and the Spanish. Now the thing about American racism is it's completely different to anywhere. It seems to be different to anywhere else. Even England, the mother country. When a white Spanish guy, French guy, Portuguese or English, right, had relations with a black woman, produced a child, that child was recognised by the father, right? But that didn't happen in America, in the United States. Americans, right? This is what historians think. They say that the reason why the child wasn't recognised, if you think of people like Thomas Jefferson was one of the signatories on the Constitution, American Constitution, and he kept slaves, right? And the children of these women that he had children with black women. Those children, he just treated slaves. They weren't actually accepted into the family. In fact, he sold some of his own children to the slave owners, which doesn't seem very nice at all to me. Anyway, that attitude was prevalent all over America, or the Americans, as we call the Americans today. And historians say that the reason why that is because when the Spanish went over to the Americas, and when the French went over to the Americas, and the Portuguese, they went basically as adventurers. It were young men going across as adventurers. They weren't married. So they had relationships with black women, and they had children. Then they recognised that these are my kids. They recognised it, and the children became a class of their own. Right? They weren't treated as slaves or lower blacks. They were treated as a separate class. Right, and they inherited what the father left them. The father would leave them stuff. If the father had multiple children, they would also be part of it. They were just treated normally. But that never happened in the American side, or the independent country America, right? The Americans' racism didn't accept black people as recognised at all. And the reason why that is because when people came to America and the Americans were there, it was American families, not adventurers. It was a man and a woman, a white man and a white woman, and their family. So when the men went off with black women, the white women didn't want anything to do with her kids. He's my husband, and my kids are going to inherit everything he's got. We don't want these blacks coming in, So the children, right, were not recognised at all. And it's very important in America, in jazz history, because what happened is when the Americans took over the rest of the country, when they moved into New Orleans and bought that area off the French through the New Orleans Purchase. What do you call the New Orleans Purchase? Anyway, when they got in, they took these mixed-raced people, which were called Creoles. A Creole is somebody who's got a black mother and a French father. And they classed them as black people. They weren't recognised. They didn't recognise them as they've got a French father and a black mother. They're just blacks as far as they were concerned. So they didn't recognise them. So what happened is these black people, right, or mixed race people, we'll call them Creoles, so the mixed race Creoles, right? In New Orleans, they couldn't do things that they initially were doing. I mean, a lot of them were, well educated and classic. Some of them were musicians who were classically trained and things like that. And when the Civil War ended, right, and there was an American reaction from the Southern Americans. This is a reaction against, the blacks who they thought were getting too much power. They brought out a load of laws. Now, those laws were called Jim Crow. We call them Jim Crow laws today. And those laws segregated the two races. And it was also upheld in a constitution, I think it was Plessy versus Ferguson. It was upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States. So segregation was accepted, or apartheid, if you want to call it by its proper name, was accepted throughout America. Now, this segregation, what that meant is that all these Creoles and mixed race people were now classed as black, which meant Any musicians who were playing could only play to black people or with black people. The races were completely segregated. You weren't working together, you weren't in a union together, you couldn't do anything together. It was all segregated. But from the music point of view, it's very good for jazz, because what it did is it concentrated all black people into one big group of shared information. So people were taught classically, these Creoles, these half white, half black, I know it's a horrible thing to say that, but you know, these mixed blood people, they could then go with the black, pure black people, you know, of black father and black mother, and be educating them. Now they were into jazz and blues and stuff, and they got these Creoles who were giving them all this European information, and that really helped jazz go along. Now what happened is, as we go on through the 1900s, 1910, 1920s, 1930s, we've still got this segregation going on. So black people are educating themselves and learning each other, and the white people who wanted to learn that couldn't get that information because they were segregated. So the only way white people could get information was by listening to records. You know what I mean? If you take people, the white people later on, they were virtually all influenced, you know, in the swing era by Louis Armstrong, listening to his records and going out and listening to him at concert and things like that. But they couldn't play with Louis Armstrong, you know. It wasn't until later on that some people were playing. I mean, Jack Teagon was a big friend of Louis Armstrong. He's a white trombone player, and he played with him quite a bit. But even he, when Louis Armstrong wanted to play in this big carnival in New Orleans, even he couldn't. They wouldn't let him play because they couldn't have a mixed blood band, if you know what I mean. If you remember Charlie Parker, I was talking to Red Rodney, when he came to Sheffield just before he died. I was talking to him about the incident when he was passed off as an albino Negro by Charlie Parker because he couldn't have mixed bands in the South America. This is in the 1950s, they couldn't have mixed bands in the South. Charlie Parker decided to pass off his white trumpet player, Red Rodney, as an albino Negro, and it actually came off as well. He actually did. If you've seen the film Bird, you actually see it in the film. But I actually asked Red Rodney about that, and he said it was true. It's just strange, isn't it? You know. Anyway, so that's what I'm trying to say that this is why music's dominated by blacks. It weren't until 1940s when you got people. You know, you got people like Roy Eldridge, who was a great black trumpet player, playing with the Gene Krupa Orchestra. Billie Holiday went with Artie Shaw's big band, and Hot Lips Page as well, and things like that. It was just one or two black musicians started playing in black bands that you actually got segregation in the music was starting to break down a little, but it was not didn't really break down until 1960s really. And then you had this thing with black people coming out saying that white people couldn't play jazz, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So it's the argument. We could talk about this forever, but I don't want to do that. You can study it yourself if you want. But the main thing is that there's no difference really between black people and white people as far as music concerned. It's just how much work you're going to put in and how many records you're going to listen to and whatever. This today I'm talking about to get into it, you know. And if you go to a good college, I mean, a lot of great musicians now go to like Berklee College, you know, and they're just playing all the time, you know what I mean? And as soon as they come out, they're playing with bands, you know, in New York. A lot of them. If you look at Adam Neely, who is a graduate of Berklee College of Music, he says, you know, get to New York and play because it's a place where all musicians are. He'd rather play in New York, he says, than play somewhere else where he's making a lot more money, because he'd rather play with good musicians. That's where they all are, you see. So that's what I'm saying. He and all those people in New York will be good players because they're all playing together and bouncing off each other, you know. But that didn't happen in the early days of jazz. It was only that bouncing off each other was only between black people. White people were segregated from it, you know what I mean. And as you went on, you just got white groups that were like trying to bounce off each other, like Bix Beiderbecke and Jimmy Dorsey, Tommy Dorsey, and people like that. They were all trying to bounce off each other as friends in the 1920s. You know, they all played together all the time. But it was very, very small group compared to the black group, which was much larger because all the blacks were concentrated together. I'm hoping I've got this across a bit to you. I mean, I could talk a lot more about the minstrel shows and how the minstrel shows in the before the Civil War, people got all their main entertainment about blacks through minstrel shows, which were really white people dressed up as blacks. And the reason why those white people dressed up as blacks is because a white person getting up and telling dirty jokes and doing dirty dancing, you didn't do things like that when you were white. But if you dressed up as a black person, you could do things like that. You could tell dirty jokes because what you were doing is you were portraying a black person was a creature that was primitive. So you could do things and do sexual dance and stuff like that because you were portraying a primitive creature. Do you see what I mean? See how all this racism is leading up to jazz? So if you think about all American music in the 1920s, 30s, and the culture, the counterculture, everything, all the culture as well in films. If you've ever seen the films of the 20s and 30s and what, the black people are always seen as servants. They're not seen as, you never see a black doctor or a black president or something. It's always seen, they're always seen as servants or under the thumb. And they've all got this stereotype way of talking, whereas a lot of the blacks in the north never do talk like that. They just talk normal, So the whole thing is geared up to the best people. What we're going to do if we're really clever in America, a clever black person, what we're going to do? We can't be a doctor, we can't be a president, we can't go into politics, we can't, The only thing we can do is either be a servant, a road sweeper, or a musician. So you got all the best people competing in the music business, and because it was being competitive, you're getting the very best people. You're getting obviously always getting the best music. So I've talked quite a bit about that. So we'll talk about something else now. Okay.